The morning sunlight filtered softly through the pale curtains of Clara's city apartment, casting a warm golden glow across the hardwood floor. It was a peaceful Sunday, the kind that came too rarely after a week of demanding clients and tight deadlines at her graphic design job. Clara cherished mornings like this, quiet, slow, filled with the comforting scent of coffee and the distant hum of a city not quite awake. She stood barefoot in the kitchen, hands wrapped around her favorite ceramic mug, and watched the dust particles dance in the sunbeam. In the bedroom, her husband Daniel still slept, his even breaths a background rhythm that had become part of her morning routine. They had been married for 3 years. Like most couples, they had their rough patches arguments over whose turn it was to do the laundry, late-night stress over bills, but beneath it all was a steady, comforting kind of love. They had built something real. One of the cornerstones of their shared life was the Dacha, a modest countryside cottage Clara had inherited from her grandmother. It sat quietly an hour outside the city, nestled between wildflower meadows and whispering trees. For Clara, it was more than a property. It was a sanctuary, a living memory. Summers spent chasing fireflies, baking bread in the small oven, listening to her grandmother's stories by candlelight when the power went out. The Dacha was her root, her escape, her refuge. So when Clara's phone buzzed on the counter and she saw the name Margaret, her mother-in-law, her stomach tensed. She hesitated before picking up. Margaret was complicated. Cold and controlling at times, she had never outright insulted Clara, but her words were laced with judgment and her smiles often seemed forced. Their relationship functioned out of necessity rather than affection, balanced precariously on Daniel's diplomacy and Clara's efforts to keep the peace. Clara answered the call with her usual guarded cheer. "Good morning, Margaret." Margaret's voice came through, clipped and direct, with no trace of greeting. "Clara, listen carefully. Tomorrow at 10 a.m., we are meeting at the notary. I'm selling your Dacha. I've already taken the advance payment from the buyers. All you need to do is sign the documents." The words slammed into Clara with such force that her legs nearly gave out. She clutched the edge of the counter, her coffee forgotten, her heart racing. For a few moments, all she could hear was the blood pounding in her ears. I'm sorry. What?" she stammered. "What are you talking about? The Dacha is mine. It was my grandmother's. You can't sell it." "I already have," Margaret replied, unbothered. "The buyers are a lovely couple looking for a countryside retreat. I've handled all the paperwork. You just need to show up and sign. Don't make this difficult." Clara's mind reeled. This had to be a mistake, a prank, some bizarre miscommunication. But Margaret's tone was final, like a judge pronouncing a sentence. Her voice had no trace of uncertainty or remorse, just cold efficiency. "You had no right," Clara whispered, fury rising in her throat. "That Dacha is legally mine. You can't do this, Margaret." "I did what was best," Margaret snapped. "You and Daniel barely use it. It's just sitting there, wasting away. The money will help all of us. Be at the notary tomorrow, 10 sharp." And then the line went dead. Clara stared at her phone in disbelief. Her fingers trembled. Her knees buckled, and she sank onto a kitchen stool trying to make sense of what had just happened. Her Dacha. Her Dacha was being sold by someone who didn't own it, without her consent. And, apparently, the money was already changing hands. She stormed into the bedroom, fury fueling her movements, and shook Daniel awake. "Your mother just called," she said, her voice tight and shaken. "She's selling the Dacha. She already took money from the buyers and wants me to sign the papers tomorrow at a notary." Daniel blinked, groggy and confused. "What? That's insane. She can't do that. The Dacha is in your name, right?" "Yes," Clara snapped, pacing the room. "Of course it is." But she sounded so confident, like she really believed she had the authority. Daniel sat up, his face hardening. "She doesn't. She has no legal right, unless—" He trailed off, dread creeping into his expression. "Unless she forged something, or lied to the buyers." "She must have," Clara said. "Why else would they give her money?" They both sat in stunned silence for a moment, the implications settling in like a fog. Then Clara stood. "We need to go to the Dacha. Now. If she's serious about this, there's probably something there, documents, listings, something that can tell us what she's done." Within the hour, they had packed a small bag and hit the road. The familiar drive that once brought them peace now felt like a march toward confrontation. Clara's mind raced the entire way, replaying Margaret's words over and over. "The money will help all of us." What did that mean? They weren't in financial trouble, and Margaret had never once mentioned need help. When they pulled up to the cottage, the familiar scent of pine and wildflowers greeted Clara like an old friend. But instead of warmth, she felt only dread. The Dacha looked exactly the same, its weathered wooden walls, the old oak tree where she and Daniel had carved their initials, the creaky porch that had once been her stage for childhood games. This was her place, her inheritance, and she wasn't about to let anyone steal it. Inside, everything was untouched. The mismatched furniture, the chipped teacups, the dusty windows that filtered in soft afternoon light. Yet something felt off. Clara moved through each room slowly, her senses heightened. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. Then, in the kitchen, she found them. "Daniel," she called, holding up a small stack of papers she had discovered tucked behind a drawer. Real estate listings, photos of the Dacha, descriptions, a suggested asking price, notes in handwriting she recognized as Margaret's. Clara flipped through the pages, her throat tightening. "She's been planning this for months," she whispered. Daniel's jaw clenched as he read over her shoulder. This wasn't spontaneous. This was calculated. Clara felt hot tears sting her eyes. What is she doing? Why does she need this money so badly? "I don't know," Daniel said, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. "But we're not signing anything tomorrow. We stopped this." As the sun set behind the trees, casting golden light across the porch, Clara sat beside Daniel, holding his hand tightly. She looked out over the wild grass swaying in the breeze, the same field she'd run through as a child, barefoot and free. This place was part of her. Margaret had tried to take it without even looking her in the eyes. But Clara wasn't that child anymore, and she wasn't going to let it go. Still, a gnawing feeling sat at the pit of her stomach. Something about Margaret's actions felt desperate, not manipulative or selfish desperate, and Clara feared the truth might be more than she was prepared for. Because when someone crosses a line that far, they're usually not just greedy. They're running from something. And tomorrow at the notary, Clara would find out what. The sun hadn't yet risen when Clara opened her eyes. She hadn't slept much. All night, thoughts raced through her mind like wildfire, Margaret's voice, the listings, the loom-in meeting at the notary office. She sat up in bed, the silence of their apartment unusually loud, and looked over at Daniel, who was already awake, staring at the ceiling, hands folded on his chest. Their eyes met. "We ready for this?" he asked quietly. "No," Clara replied, "but we're going anyway." They got dressed in silence. Clara chose a simple outfit, dark jeans, a white blouse, and a navy blazer. She wanted to look composed, professional, not like the furious daughter-in-law Margaret expected. She wanted her presence at the notary to scream, "You won't bulldoze me." By 9:30 a.m., they were in the waiting room of a small notary office on the edge of town. The building was modest beige walls, framed certificates, an old potted fern in the corner. A receptionist greeted them politely and motioned toward a private conference room. Clara's heart pounded louder with each step down the narrow hallway. When they entered the room, Margaret was already seated at the polished wood table. She wore a pale blue blazer and pearls, always curated, always impeccable. But something in her posture was different. Her hands fidgeted in her lap. A folder sat in front of her, neatly closed. Next to her sat a couple in their late 40s, the buyers. The man offered a polite nod. The woman barely glanced up from her phone, tapping impatiently. Margaret looked up, feigning surprise. "You're early." "We're here to stop this," Clara said, her voice firm but steady. Margaret exhaled slowly, as if this were all a burden she was tired of carrying. "Let's not make a scene. The buyers are ready. The papers are in order. We'll be out of here in half an hour if you just—" "I'm not signing anything," Clara cut in. The room fell silent. The female buyer glanced up, frowning. "I'm sorry, what do you mean? We were told this was a done deal." Daniel stepped forward. "It's not. The cottage, the Dacha, belongs to Clara. It's legally in her name. Margaret doesn't have the right to sell it." Margaret's lips thinned into a line. "Daniel, please, let's handle this like adults." "No, let's handle this legally," Clara snapped. "I want to know exactly what documents you showed these people. What name is on the title? Because it's mine. And unless someone forged my signature, this whole deal is built on a lie." The buyers shifted uncomfortably. The man cleared his throat. "We gave a deposit based on assurances that the seller was the rightful owner. If that's not true—" The door opened. The notary entered, a balding man in a tan suit with a kind smile that quickly faded when he sensed the tension in the room. "Ah, good morning. I see we're all here. Shall we begin?" "No," Clara said, turning to face him directly. "There's been a serious misunderstanding, or possibly fraud. The Dacha Margaret is trying to sell is mine. I never agreed to any of this." The notary blinked. "You're Clara Evans?" "Yes, and I want to see the document she gave you." And the notary, clearly caught off guard, opened the folder on the table and flipped through the papers. These were presented as ownership documents, signed "Here." He pointed at a signature. Clara leaned in. Her name was there, scrawled at the bottom of the transfer agreement, but it wasn't her handwriting. "That's not my signature," she said flatly. The notary looked uneasy. "Then I'm afraid we have a problem. I cannot proceed with the transaction under any legal uncertainty." "Excuse me," the female buyer interrupted, now visibly agitated. "Are you saying we were lied to? We've already made a deposit." "You'll get your money back," Margaret snapped. Then, catching herself, she softened her tone. "It's just a clerical mix-up. I'll fix it." "No, you won't," Clara said, standing taller. "This sale is over." For the first time since they'd arrived, Margaret's composure slipped. Her cheeks flushed. Her hands trembled slightly as she gathered the documents and shoved them into her purse. "I've had enough," she said, standing. "You're making a mistake, a big one." And without another word, she stormed out of the room. The buyers exchanged bewildered glances. The notary offered Clara an apologetic look. "I'll be reporting this. If that signature was forged, it's a serious offense." Clara nodded, still in shock. "Thank you." As she and Daniel left the building, they caught sight of Margaret getting into her car across the parking lot. Without thinking, Daniel grabbed Clara's hand and pulled her toward their own vehicle. "We're following her," he said. "Are you sure?" "She's hiding something, and I want to know what." They trailed Margaret at a careful distance through town, then onto the highway. She wasn't heading home. She wasn't heading to her lawyer. She was driving somewhere unexpected out of the residential area, past the shopping districts, into a part of town neither Clara nor Daniel frequented, the industrial district. Margaret's silver sedan finally turned into a gated lot beside a weather-worn warehouse. The sign above the entrance read, "Riverfront Storage, Unit Rentals." Clara's brows furrowed. What is she doing here? Daniel parked a short distance away. They watched as Margaret exited her car, glanced nervously around, then slipped through the side door of the warehouse. "She's meeting someone," Daniel said. "Let's go." Clara hesitated. Her heart thudded painfully against her ribs. What if it's dangerous? We don't confront, we watch, from a distance. They approached the warehouse quietly, slipping inside through the same side entrance. The inside smelled of dust, oil, and forgotten things. It was dim, lit only by the occasional flickering ceiling bulb. Rows of storage units lined both sides. Clara could hear voices not loud but tense, male and female. She and Daniel crept toward the sound and ducked behind a stack of crates. "I told you I'd have the money by today," Margaret was saying, her voice low but strained. A man's voice responded, hard and unforgiving. "You told me that 2 weeks ago, and last month. I'm out of patience, lady." "You don't understand," Margaret pleaded. "I had the deal in place. The property was almost sold." "You had no right to sell it, remember?" he sneered. "You lied to the buyers and now you're out of options." "I just need time." "No, you need to pay what you owe. $60,000 plus interest. Or I start collecting in other ways." Clara's blood ran cold. "Daniel," she whispered, eyes wide, "she's in serious trouble." "I know," he said grimly. "That man sounds dangerous." Margaret's voice cracked. "Please, don't hurt my son." The man's response was so quiet Clara almost didn't hear it. "Then pay up, or someone pays another way." Then he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing down the corridor. Margaret stood alone, shoulders trembling. Clara stepped forward before she could stop herself. "Margaret?" Margaret spun around, gasping. What are you doing here?" Daniel emerged behind Clara, his face pale and tight. "We followed you. We heard everything." Margaret looked as if she might collapse. She staggered backward, leaning against the cold metal of a storage unit. "You don't understand," she whispered. "I didn't know what else to do." "Why didn't you tell us?" Clara asked, trying to keep the fury out of her voice. "Why steal from me? Why not just ask for help?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was ashamed. I invested in something that promised huge returns. I wanted to leave something behind for you, for Daniel. I didn't know it was a scam until it was too late, and then I borrowed money to recover it. But it only got worse." Daniel stepped closer, his voice softer now. "You could have come to us." Margaret shook her head. "Would you have forgiven me?" After everything I've said to Clara all these years, I wanted to fix it before you ever had to know." Clara stood in stunned silence. All the pieces finally made sense. The desperation, the forged signature, the buyers. Margaret wasn't just cold. She was terrified. Still, Clara drew in a shaky breath and said, "The Dacha isn't just a house. It's my childhood. It's all I have left of my grandmother, and you tried to take it without even asking." "I know," Margaret said, eyes downcast, "and I'll never forgive myself for that." The warehouse felt impossibly quiet for a moment. Then Daniel said, "We'll find another way to fix this, but you can't lie to us again." Margaret nodded. "I won't." They drove back to the apartment in silence. Margaret sat in the back seat, her posture rigid, hands knotted together in her lap. Clara stole a glance at her through the rearview mirror and saw the outline of a woman unraveling someone once precise and composed, now stripped of control, exposed. Daniel kept his eyes on the road, his jaw tight. The weight of what they'd learned sat between them like a third passenger. Victor. A man who didn't just threaten, he meant it. Clara's fingers gripped her phone as she scrolled through the notes she had taken, the numbers Margaret had whispered, the name of the supposed investment that had swallowed her savings. Everything about it screamed scam. And now, with the forged documents and the cottage nearly stolen, Clara couldn't shake the feeling that things were only just beginning. When they arrived home, Clara made tea, a routine motion that grounded her while her mind spiraled. Margaret sat at the kitchen table like a scolded child, and Daniel stood nearby with arms crossed, saying nothing. "I want to help," Clara said finally, setting a mug in front of Margaret. "But you need to tell us everything. No more secrets. Every dollar, every threat, every document. We can't protect you from something we don't understand." Margaret nodded, her eyes red. She took a deep breath and began. "It started last year," she said, voice trembling. "After your father died, I felt lost. I wasn't used to being alone. I wanted to prove to myself and to you, Daniel, that I could still contribute, still be useful." Daniel softened slightly. "You've always been enough, Mom." She smiled sadly. "Well, I didn't feel that way. A friend, someone from the old church group, introduced me to an investment opportunity, a startup in renewable energy. They promised to triple the returns in 12 months. It sounded so real, so professional." Clara winced. She'd heard stories like this before, people losing their pensions, retirement savings, entire inheritances. "I put in everything," Margaret continued. "All the savings, the life insurance payout, even part of a loan I took in secret. Then nothing. The website went offline, the phone numbers stopped working." "And the loan?" Clara asked. Margaret swallowed. "That's when I met Victor, a man who said he could help me refinance the loan. It was a lie. He was just another shark. But by the time I realized he already had his claws in, he threatened me. Said he knew where you lived, Daniel." Daniel's face hardened. "He mentioned me during your meeting." Margaret nodded, her voice barely a whisper. "He said if I didn't pay him back with interest 60,000, he'd come after you. After Clara." Clara felt her stomach twist. It wasn't just about the money anymore. Victor was dangerous, and now, thanks to his threats, they were all entangled. "Why didn't you come to us before you forged my signature?" Clara asked quietly. "I was desperate and ashamed. I thought if I could sell the cottage, I could pay him off quietly, and none of you would ever have to know. But I was wrong. I see that now. Clara took a breath, steadying herself. We can't go to the police, can we? Margaret shook her head violently. He said if I involved the police, he'd find out. He said he has people who watch. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Okay, then we don't go to the police yet, but we need options. They spent the rest of the evening brainstorming. Loans, pawning valuables, selling the second car. But none of it came close to $60,000. Clara suggested one last option. Uncle Robert. Daniel looked up. We haven't spoken to him in years. He and your mother had a falling out, but he always liked you. He's wealthy, and if there's even a chance he'll help. Margaret looked uneasy, but nodded. It's worth a try. Daniel picked up the phone. The next morning, Daniel drove out to his uncle's estate. Clara stayed behind with Margaret, trying to keep her calm while also researching Victor online. But every search led to a dead end, no full name, no company, just scattered rumors of extortion and debt collection. That evening, Daniel returned exhausted, but smiling faintly. He said yes. Clara stood, barely believing her ears. What? He'll give us the money. $50,000 tomorrow, and he'll wire the rest by the end of the week. Margaret looked stunned. He really said yes? He did, but he warned us money won't keep Victor away forever. As if the universe was listening, Clara's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. Tomorrow, 3 p.m., bring the money, come alone, park by the city fountain, or I come to you. Clara showed it to Daniel, her hands shaking. It's him. The next morning, Clara made another call, this one to someone outside the family, a private investigator named Tom Riker. He was retired NYPD, worked freelance now, and had a reputation for discretion. She explained everything, Victor, the threats, the money, the meeting. You want me to tail him? Tom asked. No, Clara said. I want you to make sure the police are there. Quietly. If we can get him in a public place and catch him accepting the money, will that be enough to arrest him? If he's on record threatening violence or extortion, yes. If he's already on a wanted list, definitely. Tom agreed to watch from a distance and alert his contacts in law enforcement. The trap was set. At 2:45 p.m., Margaret arrived at the city fountain. It was a public space, families walking dogs, kids playing in the splash pads, vendors selling ice cream. She sat on a bench beneath a tree, the envelope with the check resting in her purse. Her hands trembled so badly she had to clasp them together to keep from showing it. Clara and Daniel sat at a cafe across the street, eyes locked on her. Tom stood a few yards behind the fountain, dressed like a jogger, but watching everything. At 2:58, a black car pulled up at the curb. The man who stepped out was unmistakable. Victor. He walked slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd. His face was hard and angular, with a faint scar above one brow. When he spotted Margaret, he smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. You brought it? He asked, sitting beside her. Yes. Margaret opened her purse and handed him the envelope. Victor took it, checked the contents, and smiled wider. Good. Now I don't have to hurt anyone. Behind them, Tom was already speaking into his phone. Victor stood to leave, but 3 plainclothes officers appeared out of nowhere. Victor Carlo, one asked. You're under arrest for extortion, fraud, and outstanding warrants. Victor didn't even try to run. He stood frozen, then turned toward Margaret with slow disbelief. You set me up. Daniel arrived just in time to grab Margaret's hand and pull her back. Victor snarled. This isn't over. Yes, Clara said, stepping forward, her voice loud and clear. "It is." Victor was handcuffed, read his rights, and led to a waiting patrol car. Clara, Daniel, and Margaret stood together beneath the shade of the tree, a strange quiet washing over them. "He's gone," Margaret whispered. "For good," Tom confirmed, walking up to them. "And you did the right thing. All of you." Margaret turned to Clara, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't know how to thank you." Clara looked at her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then she stepped forward and embraced her. "You don't need to thank me," she whispered. "Just don't lie to me again." Margaret held her tighter. That night, they returned to the apartment. Daniel poured a glass of wine for Clara and sat beside her on the couch. The air felt lighter. The weight, the fear, it was gone. "So," he said softly, "what now?" Clara smiled faintly. "Now we go back to the Dacha." Daniel raised his glass. "To wildflowers, oak trees, and peace." "To healing," Clara replied. 2 weeks had passed since Victor's arrest, but the emotional aftershocks still lingered. Life had begun to settle back into some form of normalcy, at least on the surface. The days were quieter now. Clara returned to her design projects, Daniel resumed his freelance consulting work, and Margaret was trying. She cooked dinner twice that week, asked Clara about her day, even suggested organizing the attic together, a peace offering wrapped in dust and old memories. But beneath the surface, tension still hummed. Clara could feel it in her chest when she passed the Dacha's key on the side table, in the way Daniel lingered in the hallway after calls from Uncle Robert, or the way Margaret stared too long out the window, hands curled tight in her lap. No one said it aloud, but they all felt it. The crisis was over, but the damage was not. One evening, Clara sat on the couch with a stack of old photographs. She flipped through them, slowly, images of her as a little girl covered in flour beside her grandmother in the Dacha's kitchen, her first dog curled under the porch steps, teenage summers painting in the sunroom, dreaming of a life filled with art. The Dacha had been the one constant in her life, a piece of earth and memory that grounded her. She wasn't ready to let go, and now, even more than before, she knew. She needed to protect it not just from external threats, but from silence, secrets, and desperation. Daniel joined her, placing a steaming cup of tea on the table. "She left," he said quietly. Clara looked up. "Who?" "My mom. Took a walk. Didn't say where. Do you think she's okay?" Daniel shrugged. "I think she's thinking. Maybe she needs to. We all do." They sat in silence for a moment before Clara spoke again. "I've been thinking," she said, "about the Dacha." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "What about it?" "I don't just want to keep it. I want to restore it, honor it, turn it into something more." He sat forward. "You mean, like, rent it out?" "No," she said slowly as the idea unfolded in her mind. "Something bigger. Something that turns that place from just my refuge into a space that gives back." She reached for her notebook and sketched quickly. A retreat space for artists, creatives, and women going through emotional trauma. A healing haven with workshops, open-air painting, writing classes, even grief support. A space where the quiet Clara had loved could serve more than just memory. Daniel looked at her drawing, impressed. "You're serious?" "I am," she said. "And if we're going to heal after what happened, we need something to move toward, not just something to run from." A pause, then Daniel grinned. "Let's do it." The next morning, over breakfast, Clara shared her plan with Margaret. I want to restore the Dacha, she said, not just for me, for all of us. Margaret listened carefully. She didn't speak immediately, just stared down at her cup of coffee. When she finally looked up, her eyes shimmered with something new hope. I'd like that, she said softly. I'd like to help. Clara blinked. Really? Margaret nodded. It's time I did something meaningful. Something that doesn't involve secrets or trying to fix things on my own. A beat. I still have some jewelry left, Margaret continued, almost shyly. A few pieces from my mother. I'd be willing to sell them, to contribute. Clara smiled, touched. That would mean a lot, Daniel chimed in. And I can build the website, market the retreat. We already have connections through your design clients. They had a vision now, a reason to rebuild. Over the following weeks, things moved fast. Daniel launched a simple website and social pages under the name The Dacha Project, a retreat for renewal. Clara sketched floor plans for small renovations, a bigger deck, new beds, converted loft spaces for workshops. Margaret researched state grants and community programs that funded therapeutic retreats, and each step they took felt like another brick laid in a road out of fear. Clara made a post about the project on her design blog, sharing the story in a carefully written piece, everything except Victor's name. The post went viral. People commented by the hundreds, sharing their own stories of places that healed them, of mothers and daughters repairing bridges, of betrayal and redemption. One message stood out. It was from a woman named Ava, who ran a healing residency in Oregon. She wrote, "What you're doing is rare. Most people suffer and move on. You suffered and you're building something. I'd love to collaborate." Clara read it 3 times, then again before bed, then again the next morning. "This is becoming real," she whispered to Daniel. "It already is." But real didn't mean easy. Renovations took money. Supplies were delayed. One contractor backed out after overcommitting to too many jobs. Clara found herself painting the guest room at midnight with aching arms and a head full of deadlines. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of old supplies in the attic, Margaret found an envelope Clara had never seen. Inside was a letter, handwritten in delicate blue ink, dated 5 years ago. It was from Clara's grandmother. "My darling Clara, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. I hope the Dacha has continued to be your light, your wild sanctuary. Life won't always be kind. People you trust may betray you. People you dislike may save you. I've learned that often it's the same people doing both. But no matter what happens, this place is yours, and it will never stop giving you what you need. Just promise me something. Don't keep it to yourself forever. Share it with someone who needs it more. Love always, Grandma Elsie." Clara sat on the attic floor, tears tracing down her cheeks, the letter crinkling in her hands. The Dacha had always known. And now, Clara did too. Spring arrived. The fields around the Dacha burst with wildflowers again, just as Clara remembered. Bees buzzed between blossoms. Morning light pooled across the new porch like a gentle invitation. The first group of guests arrived quietly, 3 women recovering from burnout, one teenage girl who hadn't spoken since her father's funeral, and a mother who had lost custody of her son but was fighting to get clean. Clara welcomed them all with simple words. "You're safe here." They walked the same paths she had once run through barefoot, baked bread together, wrote letters to versions of themselves they thought they'd forgotten. They cried in the woods. They laughed over tea. They started to heal. And in doing so, they helped Clara heal too. One evening, after the last guest went to bed, Margaret and Clara stood together on the porch. Margaret looked at the stars, a cup of herbal tea in her hands. "You were right," she said quietly. Clara glanced over. "About what?" "About this place. It's more than a cottage." Clara smiled. "It always was. We just forgot." They stood in silence for a moment. "I'll never undo what I did," Margaret continued, voice rough. "But thank you for letting me help make something better." "You did make something better," Clara said. "We all did." Margaret turned, eyes glassy. "You're a better daughter than I ever deserved." Clara reached for her hand. "Maybe we were both just scared, but we're here now, and that's enough." 6 months later, the Dacha had changed, and yet, in all the right ways, it hadn't. The walls still held the scent of pine and old books. The floor still creaked in the same spot beside the kitchen. And every morning, the sun still spilled like honey through the east-facing windows, washing the home in warmth before anyone stirred. But now, the space had layers. People had lived here, breathed here, mended here. The Dacha project had become more than a vision. It had become a movement. Word had spread beyond Clara's design blog. Wellness circles picked it up. Then art communities. Then survivor forums. What started as a quiet local retreat blossomed into something extraordinary. Applications poured in. Volunteers came from other states. Donations arrived without prompts. People didn't just want to stay at the Dacha, they wanted to believe in it. And Clara had never felt more fulfilled or more exhausted. She walked the porch barefoot one October morning, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of cinnamon tea. The breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves and early frost. She watched a young woman sketching under the big oak tree, the same one Clara had carved her initials into years ago. That girl, Josie, had arrived 3 weeks ago. She barely spoke when she came, just carried a duffel bag and a notebook. Now she was smiling again, laughing with the others during fire pit evenings, helping cook dinner, and drawing like her life depended on it. Maybe it did. Clara smiled. This was why the Dacha mattered. Behind her, she heard quiet footsteps. Margaret. Wrapped in her burgundy shawl, she looked older somehow, but also lighter. Her face had lost that pinched tightness. She had started reading again, gardening, listening without interrupting, and, most surprisingly, writing letters. Letters she never sent but wrote anyway, to Clara, to Daniel, to her late husband, to herself. "Morning," she said softly. Clara turned. "Couldn't sleep either?" Margaret smiled. "Too many thoughts and too much gratitude." And they stood in silence a while, watching the woods turn gold. "I've been thinking," Margaret said eventually, "about what happens after us." Clara looked at her, unsure what she meant. "The Dacha," Margaret said, "it shouldn't die with us, or with you." Clara nodded. "I've thought about that too." "I want to set up a foundation," Margaret said. "Use what money I still have and whatever else we can raise. Make the Dacha a permanent trust, a non-profit, so it never becomes someone's burden again, so it can't be sold. Ever." Clara felt a lump rise in her throat. "You'd do that?" Margaret nodded. "I already started looking into it." Clara blinked fast, her eyes stinging. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Margaret whispered. Clara laughed, brushing away a tear. "Yes." That afternoon, Daniel returned from the city, his car dusty from the long drive and his arms full of groceries. He kissed Clara on the forehead, ruffled Margaret's hair to her usual theatrical horror, and handed them a printed letter. "From Uncle Robert," he said. Clara unfolded it. The typewritten note was short but warm. "Dear Clara, Daniel and Margaret, I read about your project in the Times. You've made something incredible. Elsie would be proud. I'm including a contribution to help secure your foundation. The world needs places like the Dacha, and people like you. Love always, Uncle Robert P.S. Tell Daniel to stop texting me about vintage coffee grinders. I don't drink coffee." Enclosed was a certified donation for $20,000. Clara laughed through her tears. He really did come through. Margaret looked at the check and exhaled deeply. Now we can do this right. Weeks later, the papers were filed. The Dacha Foundation was born, an official trust, a governing board with Clara as chair. Clear mission, bylaws, long-term sustainability goals, legal protection from sale, fraud, or collapse. Margaret donated her heirlooms and sold a small apartment she no longer used. Uncle Robert promised ongoing yearly support. Daniel's website now included an application form, a scholarship page, and a growing list of alumni stories. The Dacha wasn't just protected. It had a future. On a cold December night, Clara stood under the stars with a bonfire crackling nearby. Guests huddled in blankets. They had just finished a final group circle and end-of-retreat ritual Clara designed to feel like a sacred exhale. Each guest placed a stone into the fire, a symbolic release of what no longer served them. When it was Clara's turn, she held her stone longer than most. She thought about her grandmother, about the morning Margaret tried to sell the Dacha, about forged signatures, threats in warehouses, letters in attics, and the quiet, miraculous return to love. Then she tossed the stone into the flame. It hissed once and was gone. That night, Clara climbed into bed beside Daniel and whispered, "Do you think she would have been proud?" "Who?" he asked, pulling the blanket over them. "My grandmother." Daniel turned toward her. "She always was." 18 years later. A young woman in a faded sweater stepped out of an Uber and stood on the gravel path leading up to the Dacha. Her breath caught as she took in the cottage wooden walls, warm light spilling from the kitchen window, the sound of birds overhead. It looked exactly like the pictures. She'd found the place online while searching for grief retreats. Her mother had passed 2 months ago and she hadn't cried since the funeral. Couldn't. She felt frozen. She climbed the porch stairs slowly, one hand clutching her satchel of sketchbooks. Inside, a silver-haired woman met her with a soft smile. "Welcome," said Clara. "Hi," the girl whispered. "I'm Sophie. You're right on time." Clara reached for the logbook on the front desk and passed Sophie a pen. "Before anything else," Clara said gently, "we always start with a truth. Write one truth you're carrying, fold the paper, and place it in the jar. It's just for you." Sophie nodded, opened the book, and wrote, "I haven't cried. I don't know how to let go." She folded the paper, dropped it into the jar, and looked up, and for the first time in months she smiled. The healing had already begun.